Well, hi there, everybody. Welcome to Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, and we're back again on 30th of January, 2020. Still no jetpacks. I'm looking on a daily basis. Hope everybody's doing well. It's good to be here. And we're going to take some questions, and we're going to provide some, well, I almost said entertainment, but that's certainly not what I was aiming for. We'll find a way to knock off an hour or two anyway. We could definitely do that. And I am looking for one thing here that I should have, but I don't see. Imagine my surprise. Anyway, I hope everybody's doing well. It's good to be here. And let's see, in terms of just the generalities of it, I am getting closer on these videos. I'm still working on the Cold War, but I'm almost done with that. I'm just wrapping up number 11. I've got one more to go. The like a cut down of the first episode has already gone up. I'll put a link up for that tomorrow, and the first one opens tomorrow. So finally get a chance to hear all of this stuff. It took up so much time. Let's see, what was I going to say about that? Oh gosh, I'm really in kind of a skitterish mood today. Oh, somebody's been asking me to turn the volume up. Hopefully that's a little better than it was before. But anyway, one more week of writing to go on that, and we should be done. So. We'll see. It is a lot of history, but the first one, first one opens tomorrow. So that's going to be great, and I'm looking forward to that in a big way, and especially looking forward to getting people's opinions and feedback on it. Been at it for for a long time, so that's about it. Let me see. Oh, and in the scattered minutes I have usually between being able to take a break from the shows and the writing and everything, things are getting closer on those animated movie things that I've been talking about for 2 years now. So still have to learn everything pretty much myself, but it's actually starting to come together, and every day we make a little more progress. So hopefully we'll have some of that to show in the near future. And that's really about it, I guess. I think we'll probably just go to the questions and see what's going on. I'm going out with my beautiful wife, hello sweetheart, who texted me just before we started with good luck, and that's a nice way to start your show, I can tell you. So we'll see what's going on in the comment section and in the questions section, and then we will see what kind of exciting news we can come up with. Yeah, this kid's obviously a little scattered today, but that's certainly not the first time. Let's see what we got here. Bernie. I have no idea what I'm doing. I like that thumbnail a lot. I thought it was fun for Joe Biden. Come on. It's been, this thing goes on this impeachment thing just goes on and on like I always thought it would. What do you say? It's just plain awful. All right, so let's see. Can you handle all of the excitement? Okay, so we'll do them just in order, and we'll kind of round the park kind of thing for today. So let's start where we can all agree is the greatest place to start. That's with top fan Eric Blake, who apparently is feeling better. I was in a nasty accident of some kind, I heard, and glad to see you're back, Eric. So here we go. Eric says, "Hey, Bill, here's something that I'd say really needs cleaning up. You recently said that the creator of a fictional universe, in this case George Lucas, should determine canon. Canon is what's considered to be real in the fictional universe of that. So, if I say that Mr. Spock is gay, then nobody cares. But if a movie comes out that says he is, then he is, because he's a product of that fictional universe. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But that's basically why canon's so important. You've got all these people involved in the same kind of fandom, and somebody's got to be the referee, and the referee is the people that puts out the product, generally speaking. So anyway, he says, here's the thing. According to George Lucas, Han let Greedo shoot first, and if you don't like that, you're advocating Han killing in cold blood. You made this subject one of your best videos, of course, also calling out Lucas for his Viet Cong interpretation of the Ewoks. Meanwhile, lest we forget, J.J. Abrams is on our side of the argument, saying, if Han shot first, why do you ask? So my question is, where does one draw the line with the creator determining canon, or do you now feel Greedo shooting first is the price we have to pay? And that specific question is a little much in the weeds, but and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on Star Wars tonight, because I know we've been kind of up and down that road just way too often lately. But it is an interesting question, and it is a question that has political consequences. I have watched over the last several months, I've watched people who are commenting on Star Wars and Doctor Who, and they used to be saying things like, we're tired of your social justice warrior left-wing agenda, and we're tired of this and that. Now they're saying, oh, so it's another chance to beat up on Donald Trump, huh? That's just continuing to build. They just the more the left does it, the more of the people that we recruit. Now, I'm going to upload tomorrow as well, or maybe tonight before I go, a speech I gave down in Ramona last week. And it was the first time I've really hit this subject as clearly as I did. But I think this goes to the entire point. And again, this is not Star Wars so much as it's politics. So hang on here. What I've come to believe lately is that the culture war is over, and we win. Let me just adjust this real quick. And the reason I say we win is because all of the weapons that the left has had are either gone or rapidly decaying. Pretty simple. Let's start with the news media. They used to be able to tell the country what was real and what wasn't real because they controlled the access to information. So if Walter Cronkite says that the war in Vietnam is lost, then it's lost. And they had the entire means of communication, and they had it for 35 or 40 years. They don't have it now. Not only is there an alternative in form of the internet, but the credibility of the news agencies is now down near zero. And as I said before, people think that CNN sells news, but they don't. They sell credibility. And so does the New York Times and all of it. You can get your news from anybody. The whole point of CNN or the Times is that you used to believe that if it came from the New York Times, then if it's not got to be true, then certainly it's more likely than, the ravings of a guy walking down the street talking to himself. But now, I'd much rather trust that guy walking down the street than what I hear from CNN. So there's that. Then the other series of weapons they've had the pop culture, which means movie stars mostly, TV stars. We saw Ricky Gervais just eviscerate them, mock them to their face. And much more importantly than that, when NBC put up this video, 6 or 7 million views in 24 hours, I scrolled down 200 comments, and not one of them, not a single one, was either in defense of the movie stars or attacking Ricky Gervais. None of it. Every single one of the first 200 that I looked at said basically, about time somebody told these stuck-up snobs to get over themselves. Nobody cares what they have to think. So they used to have control of information, and they lost that. And they used to have control of the pop culture, and nobody really cares about that anymore. Everybody's doing all of these other things. Their political philosophy is all about demonizing white people and rich people and old people, and they've got three rich old white people for their slate. All of it is coming apart for them. And what I've come to realize, and this is the point that comes back to Star Wars and why this whole Star Wars thing is so important. I've just watched it happen in front of my eyes. It's been about a year and a half now. Really started earlier than The Last Jedi, but The Last Jedi was the watershed. But think this over for a second. I maintain that things like Star Wars are a religion for post-Christian America, that people have religious feelings about these kind of things. And certainly there's no question that Star Trek fills a philosophical void and an emotional void, and provides many aspects of what a religion provides. It also provides a code of behavior, somebody to look up to, and so on and so on and so on. Same for Star Wars, same for all the rest. So they've destroyed Star Wars, they've destroyed Star Trek, and they continue to destroy it with this latest thing, this Picard thing, where the Federation is a bunch of xenophobic haters because Donald Trump is a xenophobic hater, you see. So what they're going to do is they're going to turn the United Federation of Planets into a totalitarian state in order to let us know that we live in a totalitarian state now that we've made a decision that they disagree with. So that's gone. A couple days ago, Doctor Who, which I've never been a fan of, nevertheless, it's been on for nearly 60 years now, has had a string of doctors. The 13th Doctor was a woman, and now we find out that they've met the next Doctor, apparently, who's not only a woman, she's a black woman, and they're rewriting the whole thing so that she was the original Doctor. So in other words, the original Doctor Who was a black woman, and then all of the other incarnations over the last 60 years were just basically white men stealing her, her identity, I suppose. Even though it's the same person regenerating, there you go. So here's the point. The reason that the culture war is over and we win is because people would rather walk away from something that they deeply love than to stay with it and endure the left-wing message. If people were getting a social justice version of Star Wars and they were staying with Star Wars, we'd be in real serious trouble, but they don't. And think about that. The message, the social justice left-wing message, is so obnoxious and so revolting to people that people will walk away from Star Wars or Star Trek or whatever that has been the center of their life. And they'll walk away from it rather than stay and watch this happen to it. It's not Star Trek anymore. It's not Star Wars anymore. It's not Star Trek Discovery's not Star Trek. Everybody knows it. Same for Picard, and Last Jedi is not Luke Skywalker, and all of it. What the left has done is, in the manner of a parasite wasp, which you may know is the basis for the alien in the Alien movie, Alien and Aliens with Ridley Scott and whatever his name is. The parasite wasp will find an animal, it'll sting it, and it will eject its eggs into that creature. Then the eggs grow inside the creature, and then they burst out. And that's a pretty kind of a revolting way for a species to go through life, but that's what the parasite wasps do. And that's exactly what the left has done, you see. They've taken a philosophy that nobody wants, and in order to sell it, they have put it inside of a host organism. So they've got this nasty little philosophy called progressivism. Nobody wants to buy it. Nobody wants to vote for it. So they can't come out and say that what it is what it is. So they try and sell it to you other ways. And when people don't want it in school and people run away from it in school and go into video games and movies to escape from this horrendous philosophy, then they've decided that, like the parasite wasp, they're going to lay their eggs inside of things that people like. They're going to lay their eggs inside of Marvel comic universe. They're going to lay their eggs inside of Star Trek and Star Wars and Doctor Who and Ghostbusters and all of it. And then the assumption was that we would all ingest this because we love it so much and we can't stop ingesting it. And as we ingested it, as we continued to watch these Star Wars and Star Trek things and love them the way we did, their belief that people are infinitely malleable, that there is no human nature, is simply big win for them, because they figured, okay, so now the reason that people were conservatives was because the pop culture was conservative. All we have to do is make the pop culture progressive, and then people will be progressive. And it didn't work. It's not like it's not working or it may not work. It didn't work. It's over. People would rather walk away from Star Wars than listen to social justice Star Wars. And think about that. That's actually really, really, really important. More to the point of Eric's question in terms of canon and so on, the reason why all of these things are so important, a lot of people have blamed Disney for this and corporate greed, but it's not the corporate aspect. It's the political aspect. It's the fact that they're all social justice warriors, or at least they tell themselves they are. And they thought that they could inject this and change the culture. And instead of changing the culture, what it did, it destroyed the carriers. It destroyed the franchises. And I want to talk just for a minute about this idea of a franchise. What's the difference between Star Wars and like Ice Pirates? I mean, they're both made in the 70s. They're both stories about outer space, and they've got their own little universe. They've got their own spaceships. They've got a story, lead characters, all of it. Why is Star Wars a thing and Ice Pirates not a thing? Or The Last Starfighter, or Silent Running, or any number of these one-off. Event Horizon, which I thought was actually a pretty good movie. Why is there no Event Horizon franchise? Why? The left thinks that these things are just interchangeable. They think that they write this horrendous scripts for Picard, let's say, and they're not written by people who wrote the original series, because those people had some brains and some talent. So they just figure, well, we'll just sit down and we use the same words that they used, and that's all that these idiots watching the show really want. So we'll chuck in some of the words, and then we'll tell whatever stories we want to in order to raise their consciousness to our level. That's their attitude. So they said apparently in Picard, that the new character, who is a diverse young strong woman, imagine our surprise, is actually the daughter of Data that she was. Now listen now, this is what they said, and I'm not going to. The reason I'm going to go into the weeds with this is because it's important that you understand, I think, or it's important that I understand anyway. They said that this human being, this girl, young woman, this is what they said, was she was cloned from one of Data's positrons, because Data had a positronic brain, and they were able to clone this human being from this robot's positron. Now that is an indication that whoever wrote that thinks that a positron is some kind of science fiction particle, just like any other particle, and as long as it's got something that sounds kind of cool like positron, people will buy it. A positron is an electron with a positive charge. It is an exceedingly simple device. It's part of an atom. It's not even a complete atom. There's the information that's encoded in these insanely complex molecules like DNA. DNA is composed of a series of atoms combining into molecules and then forming an incredibly complex structure. And even the building blocks of the DNA, the amino acids, they're all composed of several different, they're molecules that are made up of several different atoms. So they said, it's basically, what they said was, we were able to clone a human because we managed to capture an electron from this android. Now, the reason that Star Trek is a thing and Lost in Space isn't is because Star Trek appealed to people because because somebody cared enough so that smart people would get it. It's a self-serving kind of thing, but basically it's true. Star Trek, I'm just going to count the original series because, frankly, that's really all there is, as far as I'm concerned. Star Trek, I don't want to start this with anybody, by the way. Fine, whatever your Star Trek is, as long as it's not Discovery or any of that, that nonsense. Star Trek basically said, we have a vision of the future, and the vision of the future is an optimistic vision of the future, which was quite a thing to say in the middle of the Cold War. The USS Enterprise is America. It's multiracial. It's a pluralistic society. And what Star Trek is America in space, just America going from planet to planet. And then the writers would build whatever moral message they want to into that planet or that culture. And so that's what you ended up with. But the people that wrote Star Trek understood that this world they're going to build has to be relatively believable, and it has to be internally consistent. Which means that if you decide that the Enterprise is going to move at warp factor 1 and that's the speed of light, you're going to have to go faster than that, because whoever wrote warp factor 1, probably Roddenberry in the beginning anyway, realized that if we're in the USS Enterprise and we leave Earth and we head out to Alpha Centauri at warp factor 1, we'll be there in 4.5 years. And obviously that wasn't going to work. So all of these pieces got put together. And the transporter, for example, wasn't magic. It's not something we can do quite yet today, although we're able to do we apparently have transported particles. But you could understand how the transporter could work someday, that this would be something that scanned basically disintegrated you, ionized you, scanned the position of all these atoms, recorded it, shot it down to the planet, and put it back together again. And it was consistent. And all of these things were consistent. And so people... You never heard Star Trek ever say, it'll take us light years to get there. Light year is a distance of a measurement of distance, not of time. And so basically, the people that wrote Star Trek knew enough about astronomy and enough about science to make it a believable universe. And when you throw in the optimism, it became a magnet for hundreds of millions of people, and I'm one of them. I mean, this whole office you can see the Gorn captain behind me. The Gorn captain didn't ever convince me that was a real alien. It looked like a guy in a rubber suit, but the message that they were selling, I believed, and so I believed it. When you don't have anything like that level of intelligence or skill, and you start saying things like, the guy took a full warp to the face, and he's still conscious. It's like you have no idea what you're doing. You're destroying it, and because it's official, because it's canon, the destruction remains, and it can't be undone. And this is the thing I kind of want to talk about. Although the important thing is that, let me phrase this as succinctly as I can. The left has been working on penetrating the culture and the news media since there's been a left, which realistically is probably the early 60s in this country. Now, I don't think anybody can argue that confidence in the news media is higher now than it was in 1966. Certainly people are more skeptical of news, and there are alternative means of delivering news by way of the internet. So the power of the news media relative to the 60s and 70s, the news media is far, far less powerful. 40 years of hectoring and lecturing and protesting and talking politics has meant that the respect that people used to have for the Academy Awards, I didn't miss that show for years and years and years. I haven't seen an Academy Awards show in 25 years now, 20 years. Certainly not since the beginning of the Gulf War. 2003 might have been the last time I saw a show. And when people started talking politics, I gave up. So nobody can also say that that movie stars have the power over people's imaginations that they used to, and Hollywood itself is no longer nearly as powerful as it used to be. A lot of people are looking at online content, viewer-produced content, all of it. So that's weaker. Their political field is weaker. All of the things that they have are weaker, far weaker now, and that's telling me that the left has given this their best shot. In other words, the weapons that they're holding today are nothing like as sharp as the ones they were holding in the mid 60s. And no matter how much damage they've done, and God knows they've done enough of it, they didn't win. They could not convince us. Even wrapping this social justice warriors, even wrapping it in Star Wars, didn't make it something that people would be willing to swallow. They would rather walk away from Star Wars than swallow this. That's it. It's over. It's a win. If they couldn't have done it with all of those tools as powerful as they were, which are getting weaker every day, if they couldn't do it during the last 40 years, then they couldn't do it, and they can't do it. It's over. They lose. And as I say in this speech I'm going to put up, the war in the Pacific was won in 6 minutes on June 4th of 1942, after that the American attacks on the Japanese fleet at Midway. The war was won. We'd won the war at that point. They never took the initiative again. We won the war, but the war wasn't over. And all of the serious killing happened after we'd won the war. That's, I think, indisputable. There's no question about the casualties. And there's no question that after Midway, the Japanese Navy never had any kind of initiative, any kind of a chance. It was over. 6 minutes, it was over. Sorry, I keep making that mistake. It was won. In 6 minutes, the war was won. And it went on for another 3 years, where most of the casualties happened before it was over. Same thing with Stalingrad and all the rest of this stuff. The wars are won in the first third of the war, and then it goes on for another 2/3 of the total time, just so that more people could get killed, with the result being as inevitable as it always was. So the left has lost the culture war. They've lost, but it's not over. And the worst is coming. And as I mentioned in that speech, which is about an hour, where everybody can imagine what civil unrest looks like when it comes from the bottom up, because everybody knows what riots look like. But what happens when the civil unrest comes from the top down? What happens when the people who are determined to smash things and destroy society are the billionaires and the tech giants and the movie stars and the editors of newspapers? What happens then? So that's that. Now, as far as the canon thing goes, for Eric's question, I think that I've seen several people. In fact, Doomcock did a video on just this one subject. They have stolen and destroyed our mythology, and people want to take it back. So I don't think canon should be something that the owners determine anymore. I was going to say I was wrong about that, but that was before all of these things happened. The situation has changed. I don't know whether Star Trek or Star Wars can ever be recovered. I think they might be able to, but certainly not by the people that own the copyrights, because those people don't care and they don't know. They don't know and they don't care. They're just looking at it as a cash cow they can squeeze the last dollar out of and the last political leverage out of. They don't care. So if somebody were to say to me, is Star Trek dead? I would say no. But everything that happened, starting with J.J. Abrams, is just fan fiction. The whole Kelvin timeline, fan fiction. And Star Trek lives in Axanar, and it lives in the continuing voyages and all of these other extraordinarily well done fan films. And the future of Star Wars is going to be in the hands of the fans. It's going to be in the hands of people who decide to make low-budget films that become canon because they're true to the source material. This is the thing. When the owners of the copyrights can invert Star Wars to turn it into something not only different but inverse of what it was, then they've lost the power, in my opinion. Now, canon is what the fans determine, and when Axanar comes out, that's going to be canon as far as I'm concerned. I've never, for a split second, did I ever think that that Discovery was Star Trek. It just wasn't. So anyway, we'll have to decide what we're going to do about that. But certainly, the owners of the copyright have destroyed these incredibly valuable things. People loved, that they loved. My entire office is filled with Star Trek stuff, and that's only because it had such a profound effect on me. So anyway, I know I must be doing a great show because nobody in the comment section is. People are just having conversations about, Rounds magazines, and so it's always nice to know that you're commanding that kind of attention. On the other hand, it's been off to a slow start. So what can I tell you? Okay, back to Facebook. C. Eddie says, Bill, your thoughts on why is it that Hollywood seems to have lost the ability to make movies with amazing movie soundtracks? If you look back to the 70s and 80s, there were loads of movies with incredible songs written for them or older songs used in them. Easy Rider, Blues Brothers, Top Gun, Scarface, Star Wars, etc. These days we have Let It Go, Frozen, assuming everything is awesome, Lego Movie. Why doesn't Hollywood want us to sing along anymore? Singing is kind of square, and entertainment is more sophisticated than it used to be. I've never really understood I mean, I understand it. It's just not me. But millions of Americans used to just go out and sit in a nightclub and listen to somebody sing. They just would sing. This is like, what are we going to do? Oh, we're going to go to the club and this guy's a singer. He's going to be singing for 2 hours. It's like, really? Or play the piano. And as the technology and the sophistication of entertainment has increased, then so does the kind of the demand for spectacle. And the other thing, too, is that if you look at the movies from the period that you're talking about, the balance between a music score and the visual effects was a lot more even than it is today. Visual effects have advanced to astonishing levels. Sound design has also gotten better, but the music becomes less important as the picture becomes more hypnotic and more, entertaining. Obviously, a lot of the modern movies are just garbage, and they're garbage because people think that you can special effects your way into a movie that's worth watching, or into, anything kind of worthwhile. But it's just not true. So I miss the old scores. My favorite movie score was North by Northwest. I think that's fantastic. And I mean, John Williams surely could have gone out better than he did with this last thing, but it is what it is, and I just don't see who's singing, who's humming songs. The other thing too is that this whole thing is part of this idea that I've mentioned, where we don't share the same culture anymore. We all used to sit together and watch TV, and we all used to watch Gilligan's Island, and we all used to watch, Hee Haw, because there was nothing else on. But nobody has that shared experiences anymore, and so we are all kind of creatures who are sort of built into our own little worlds of our own culture and of our own choosing and so on. We're going to go to the BillWhittle.com page here for a while and take some of those from there. Charles Domes says, or asks, daughter is a freshman at COE in CID Intro to Philosophy is philosophy and science fiction. But no, Asimov has... Okay, sorry, I'm having a hard time following this one. Okay, so there's a daughter's taking classes on philosophy and science fiction, but there's no Asimov, no Heinlein, no Frank Herbert. comment. Yes, the comment is that your daughter is getting ripped off, and well, technically speaking, you're getting ripped off. They're going to be shown substandard material based on the color of the skin of the people that wrote the story. That's where we are now. They're gonna chuck away the kind of deep science fiction that caused people to think very seriously about issues, and that's all gone. Shakespeare's gone. Twain is gone. All of them gone, because identity politics says that not only are they not worthy because of who they came from, we obviously have to have room for other writers of color and whatever else you want to say. My feeling is, hey, if a writer of color writes an amazing piece of science fiction, then that should be taught like everything else. But just doing it because of the color of their skin strikes me as an incredibly racist and demeaning and self-defeating argument too. What I mean by self-defeating is it's like saying, we're not going to teach Shakespeare in literature anymore. We're going to teach. The only one I can think of is Maya Angelou, and I'm not a super big fan of hers. But in any event, you get the idea. What they're basically saying is, we're gonna force you to listen to a philosophy from a writer who was not able to convince people on their own that the philosophy was worth sharing. So Shakespeare is Shakespeare because it's excellent, and you don't have to be British to enjoy Shakespeare. You don't even have to speak English, although I cannot imagine what Shakespeare in other languages it sounds like. Shakespeare in German must be quite a surreal experience, I would imagine. But we're going to basically say that what they're basically saying is the reason we're going to take away these classic authors and replace them with our authors is because nobody reads our authors. So we're going to make you read them. And all of the things that people have been reading for hundreds of years because they have such value, you're not going to read those anymore. Not allowed to. And this is how they are convinced that this is how they're convinced. See, you know what? This is the whole thing. And this is the whole thing with what we just talked about with Star Wars and so on. This is the major point. The left thinks that culture goes into people and turns them into something. When in point of fact, it's the people who do things that then create the culture. It's not the other way around. The culture doesn't create people. People create the culture. They're convinced that if they can change the culture, they can change people, but it doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. And this is their big, enormous, gigantic mistake, and the catastrophe is that we've been letting them get away with it. They think that if they change Star Wars, they'll change people. But Star Wars didn't create people. People were already the way they were, and they liked Star Wars. They're attracted to it because it made sense to them. These people are such absolute idiots, and they're such mean-spirited, and they're so lazy, you know? That's really it. They're just so damn lazy. It's hard to write a best-selling novel, and it's hard to write a really excellent play, and writing 30 of them is much harder. And so if you're so lazy and so barren and devoid of talent that you can't produce something that has merit on its own, then you just simply get control of a university and you make sure that nobody reads the stuff that people want to read and everybody reads the stuff that you wrote or that your friends wrote or that the people you admire wrote, even though they clearly don't have the same merit. Because if they did, you wouldn't have to force people to read them. So somebody in the comment section, Dave Big Booty as usual, says, Shakespeare in Klingon. I would be willing to bet you that Shakespeare in the Klingon language is better than it is in German, or French for that matter. And by the way, why is Klingon an actual language? I mean, you can take classes in Klingon. It is a completely filled out language, has its own syntax, its own vocabulary, all of that. So why is that? Why are people around the world able to converse in a fictional language from a group of people that never existed? Why? Well, For one thing, the Klingons were iconic. They were iconic. They meant something bigger than, oh, it's just another guy in a rubber suit. It's the Klingons were the warrior caste. That's what they were, and they were all in on the warrior thing, and their language reflected that, and people were so entranced by the idea of this warrior culture that people who this idea of warrior lifestyle appeals to decided, hey, why don't we just fill out the language? Because Klingons sounded like what Klingons would say. If you take a Klingon and you give him a language that sounds like French or like the Elvish language, and it's something very soft, the Lutharian, and then they're not Klingons anymore. Has to be. It makes sense. It was internally consistent. This is why it worked. This is why there's a language that you can learn, because it made sense, because it sounded like what these people would say, and we know what these people would say is because they've been so well fleshed out over the course of 40 years that we know what Klingons do and don't do. And apparently, there's, because I didn't watch it and I'm not going to, but Picard, Star Trek Picard, has 2 house servants out at his little chateau, and they're both Romulans. And you see they're like housekeepers. One of them is cooking for Picard, and the other one's kind of like a butler and dressing him and all the rest of it. They're Romulans, and you see this, and you think, I didn't know there were beta Romulans. I mean, I didn't know there were Romulan wimps. I didn't think that there were any Romulan toadies or anything. These people are servants to this Earthman, and they're going to tell all the backstory. Well, Picard saved him, and Picard. It is the destruction of the idea of Romulans, who are stoic, proud race of people who would much, much rather die than surrender. And now these idiots have them cooking Picard's dinner. Probably they'll have him washing their feet too. And he looks like a beta male, this Romulan, He's got kind of this receding hairline and kind of thing, and he looks kind of like, he just looks like a Romulan hairdresser, let's just say that. Right? And so he's not a Romulan, and he's not a Romulan, and I understand that Romulans are a false species, that they don't really exist. They are metaphorical. They're iconic, and they carry a meaning. They're stoicism. They are all of these alien races take human qualities and go all in on 1 or 2 of them. So the Romulans are unemotional. I'm sorry, the Vulcans are unemotional, the Romulans are stoic, the Klingons are violent, and that's the definition of the race. And so that's why it worked. But when you start doing this kind of thing, you just completely destroy it, and these idiots think that people will still buy it. It's like, yeah, sure, of course we have a bunch of hairdresser and graphic designer Romulans who are working for this Earth person who they despise, but they don't despise him, they look up to him. Well, then they're not Romulans. And that's just, there you go. So I'm sorry that they're not teaching Heinlein. Obviously, they're not teaching Heinlein, because if they taught Heinlein in school, you wouldn't have any progressives anymore. But I wish I could tell you I'm surprised. Just give them the books to read, Charles, and just tell them, pick it up and see. All right, so also on the Bill Whittle members page, question from Brian Yoder. Hey, senpai. I have no idea what that means. Have you read these authors? What do you think of them? Ambrose Bierce? No, I have not. And the reason I haven't read Ambrose Bierce was because I've read every single thing that the next person on the list, which is Mark Twain, wrote. And the little I've seen of Ambrose Bierce just looks like Twain light, It's like it's John the Baptist compared to Jesus. I haven't read a lot of Ambrose Bierce because the little I've read just seems to me like I can get from Twain much better. What do I think of Mark Twain? I think Mark Twain is one of the 3 people that I have in highest esteem in the literary and fictional world. I think Mark Twain is not just brilliant. He's timelessly brilliant. His take on people and how things worked is as fresh today as it was when he wrote it. And of all the things that I admire, that I like about Twain, the way he set up his own character and the legend he built around himself made it possible for him to get a laugh with a single word, because because of the character he created for himself. It's absolutely brilliant, and it's so self-deprecating. I think I remember seeing that Mark Twain said that his family tree was a gallows, you know, and and he said the two most beautiful words in the English language are "not guilty." And on and on and on with this whole thing. So you could just get an enormous laugh out of these things, and it was a remarkable construction. Now there is a guy on YouTube, and I don't know if they claimed it was a recording of Mark Twain's voice. There was no recording of Mark Twain's voice that I'm aware of. None of it in existence yet, anyway, that has been found. There is movie footage of Mark Twain taken by Thomas Edison at Mark Twain's house, Stormfield. And the part of it that is so hard, and this is just a couple months before he died, and the part of it that's so frustrating about watching this is here's motion picture footage of Mark Twain, and because it's so early in the movie, in the idea of movies, that it is so wide. The shot is so wide. It's like, here's Mark Twain and Mark Twain's house. And I can see all of his house, and here's a little guy in white. And here's Mark Twain in his garden. And here's a guy who maybe takes up a third or fourth of the frame, head to toe. And you're looking, and here's Mark Twain talking to his daughters, and he's sitting out there having tea with his daughters, and you might as well be in the next county. And I watched this, I said, for God's sakes, man, can we please get a close-up? Just one. Can we just get one close-up? But in any event, we have plenty of still close-ups, still pictures of him. Mark Twain said that there used to be a Mark Twain look-alike contest, because that's another thing he did. He was iconic looking. He would dress in white and go into a banquet where everybody's dressed in black, and he'd be dressed in white head to toe. And people would question him about it. He said, I know my clothes are clean because I can see when they get dirty. Your clothes could be filthy for all we know. But there were Mark Twain look-alike contests, and people would send him photographs showing how much they looked like him, and he got so tired of this that somebody sent him a picture of him. A guy who looked like Mark Twain sent Mark Twain a picture of himself. See how much I look like you? And Twain wrote him back and said, it's absolutely astonishing, the likeness. From now on, I'm going to use this photo to shave. I mean, that's as good as it gets. I miss him. I feel like he was a friend. He had a quality of writing that made you feel like he was a friend. Like, it was just so open and so accessible that, I mean, when I said I've read everything Mark Twain wrote, I mean, I read everything. I read the letters he wrote. I read transcripts of his speeches, not to mention all of the other things. And he was a remarkable guy, fascinated by technology, very bad with money, which is what you'd expect. And Hemingway, of all people, was it Hemingway who said this? Hemingway said that that American literature started with Huckleberry Finn. I think he's right about that. But somebody commented, it might have been Hemingway or somebody else, said that it's very, very, very unusual for a writer to have the ability to perform. I think it was Hemingway who said that the difference between writing and performing is there's such antithetical experiences that the idea of a writer who could be a good performer or a performer who could be a good writer was beyond his beyond Hemingway's ability to understand, and that's certainly true. He was a great show. Anyway, what I was going to say about that YouTube thing is, there's no recording of Mark Twain's voice. There is a recording of a guy who knew Mark Twain, who listened to him, seen him several times, doing his impersonation of Mark Twain. And that's as close as we're going to get. And it's not pleasant. It's not what you were hoping it would be. I'd known for a long time that Lincoln's voice was very much higher. Lincoln is always portrayed. Lincoln, Daniel Day-Lewis got it exactly right. People, when I was reading a book, he would, just 20 years ago, they would say when Lincoln would introduce himself in a meeting or something, he'd start off by saying, "Mr. Cheerman." That's how he would spell it, Cheerman. That's how it sounded, Mr. Cheerman. And Daniel Day-Lewis's Lincoln is magnificent, absolutely perfect. Robert Heinlein, yeah, Heinlein is brilliant. Heinlein, Heinlein's easy to mock, and people do, and Starship Troopers is a perfect example of a left-winger trying to steal the glory of a real writer, and then at the same time completely destroying what it was the guy was trying to say, turning it into a mockery. But Heinlein is he's like the paragon of practicality. He is the kind of guy that cuts through all the BS and simply just okay, this is when you get down to brass tacks and you're finished, kind of dicking around. This is where you're going to be. So yeah, I've read a lot of Heinlein. I like him very much. I've read next name on the list is Ayn Rand. I read Atlas Shrugged. I read it all, and that was work. Ayn Rand and her entire objectivist philosophy. Objectivism is brilliant. It's really brilliant, and when she's writing about encroachment of people's liberties, she's insanely good. But in between these nuggets of wisdom, there's some really, really, really bad melodramatic kind of, and you can kind of look at Ayn Rand and see that you're really dealing with kind of a thinking machine there rather than a feeling machine. But Atlas Shrugged's a classic, and not so much the novel as just the entire take on it, that the people who produce things, that the people who advance human society are the ones who are preyed upon. They're had their inventions taken away. They're taxed into oblivion. They're absolutely they're taken. They're treated as a food source for vampires, and nobody's made that case better than her. That the people that do things are constantly just fed upon by masses of people that take things. And her description of how things are taken and how this, and the justifications they use is just grand. Next name on the list is Lord Tennyson. I have to say I have not read any of Lord Tennyson. I know who he is, but I'm not a big poetry guy, I'm sorry to say. And H.P. Lovecraft, I have not read, although I'm familiar with his work. The whole Cthulhu thing is kind of cool. That whole kind of dark world. I noticed earlier in the comment section when we were talking about Star Wars, some people had mentioned Warhammer 40K, which is another science fiction franchise. Started out as a board game, and which I've gotten deeply involved with because the lore, the background material on 40K is so good. It's so good. It's just so well written, so well thought out, so well fleshed out, and it's so dark. It's just so dark, It's and that's why it's wonderful. It's like a universe that is just a perpetual horror movie. There's nothing but fighting, and there's nothing but dying, and then there's nothing but just this brutality of this religion, and the emperor of mankind is this super gigantic psychic who's been mortally wounded, and he's inside this golden throne. He's basically inside a like a pressure chamber, and he's just slowly dying. He's the corpse god. He's the and so his symbol is the skull. It is so bloody dark, but it's so impressive. And there was one piece of video out. I guess it was either a fan film or maybe part of a cutscenes from a 40K game, but it shows a parade on the home world, a victory parade, and and you see these things just marching, and it's so revolting because it's so real. You can see the Nazis, and you can see these. Then behind them are the Astartes, and they're even bigger. And but the thing about like 40K would be then there's like a like some kind of a barge or something that's being pulled by like poles coming out of the side. It's being pushed, and it's pushed by maybe 20 naked men with bags over their heads who are like prisoners of some kind, and they're just humiliating them. It's just horrible, and it's fascinating, and that kind of Lovecraft thing is really built into 40K, because in 40K the whole universe is just a very dangerous, hostile place to be. There's this dimension called the Warp, which is basically another dimension that you can travel through, but it's filled with monsters and evil creatures, and they constantly sneaking into our world, and just it's fantastic. It's really, really, really clear. The armor is so stylized. I mean, these guys have got shoulder plates, that are out to here, and they're wearing this battle armor, and the reason that they're done that way, well, originally is because they had to paint these miniatures, and you can't get very little thin details on miniatures. But the main thing is to make the head very small. Like the head is almost barely, not even there. It's all just brawn. Fantastic. Orson Scott Card, I've read some of his novels. I thought they were great. George Orwell is a genius, and I did an essay, or maybe it was a firewall, I think, called Reading Orwell Backwards. And what you find is, if you go back in Orwell, if you start at 1984, and then you go to Animal Farm, he becomes a little more liberal. And then as you get to the books that he spent in London, and then one called I think the Pier at Wigan, Wigan Pier. Wigan is a working class neighborhood in Lancashire. It's where my family's from. And he basically is, at that point, he's kind of a social justice warrior. He's a socialist and all the other things. And the thing about Orwell is, if you read him start to finish, he was in the Spanish Civil War, was wounded in the Spanish Civil War, shot through the neck, as I recall. If you read him front to back, in the order that he lived his life, you start out with a guy who's a very big left-wing liberal socialist, who over time becomes more and more and more disillusioned by what socialism actually is, to the point that he writes this masterpiece of the horrors of this sort of totalitarianism. And so many people today think that this Big Brother is a right winger, and Big Brother is Ingsoc, it's English socialism. He's Stalin, and 1984 is an absolute masterpiece. The Road to Wigan Pier. Thank you, Martin. It's brilliant. And then finally, Aldous Huxley, and I've seen a little bit of Brave New World, but I haven't really read much of his stuff. So anyway, that's that. John Frost has something here. I was trying to. Wow, it's a little too in depth for me to even read, to be honest with you. But I'll read it when the show's over and see if I can make some sense out of it, and then we'll hopefully have a chance to talk about that later. A has a couple comments here. Let's see. It's good that the Holocaust is well known in pop culture. When will there be movies or TV shows about the Gulag Archipelago, the Katyn Forest Massacre, Estonian Forest Brothers, the Ukrainian Holodomor, the Cultural Revolution, the Cambodian killing fields, and the nightmarish horrors of North Korea? Surely these stories would draw eyeballs. They would draw eyeballs. People would be fascinated and appalled and shocked by them. Those films will never be made because those murderers were all left-wingers. And the left-wingers make the movies. I think I would so much love to do a movie about these things. There is one out there, and I've mentioned it several times before. It's on YouTube in really quite low quality with subtitles, English subtitles. I want to say it's like a 360 resolution or something. But that's enough to get the point. It's called The Chekist, and it's about the first generation of Soviet secret policemen and all the murdering that goes on. And it is absolutely brutal. It is just nothing but people stripped naked, shot, dragged into trucks, and hauled off. And it takes a strong stomach to watch that movie. But more than anything, I think that movie had an effect on me because it really was just unbelievable. Matter of fact, I was just listening to the first part of the Cold War, which, as I said, opens tomorrow, and I cover the Chekists, and I cover Dzerzhinsky and what happened in the basement of the Lubyanka and all of that, and so much of that came from that movie. So, but nobody's going to make them. I saw some English woman politician. I was watching a lot of stuff on Brexit and Nigel Farage, and there's this woman liberal, who said that Mao did a lot more good than harm, and the people next to her just went, "What?" But she really believes it. He killed 50 million people. 50 million. But he did more good than harm, because why? Why? What makes you say that? What makes you say Castro did some good for his people? He kept those people poor for 50, 60 years, and when he died, he had $800 million. Who's the chump here? Hi, Mama Maria. And I'll take another one from A, and then maybe look around a little bit, and then I'm going to go, because obviously your boy's a little tired today. This is also from A on the members only page. Was the Virginia gun rights rally a tactical victory but a strategic defeat for the gun rights community? I'll bet you the government scanned every face, collected every cell number, scraped every social media post, and created a monster database for future use against our side. A, I hate to be the person to break this to you, and I'm not trying to be flip here, but all of this information was had and has been had for a decade now. I've listened to lectures from people who are on the inside of Google, and I forget what the number is, but I think it's 3 million pages of data on every single citizen of the United States. And you could say that's not possible. 3 million pages of data, it is not possible. Well, it is possible, because they have recorded every click you've ever made on the internet. They've taken pictures of every website, every picture you've ever downloaded, all of it. They've got it all. And it wasn't until I listened to this that I realized, and I have to say, the person doing the demonstration didn't seem to get it. He was talking about all of the data mining they're doing, and maybe he did come to think. Anyway, the reason they're collecting all this data is not so they can come after us and take our guns. The reason they're collecting all this data is because they are convinced, and they may be right, that if you collect enough data on human actions, it doesn't matter what it is, you can then put together an AI, artificial intelligence, that will look at that data and find correlations that are not immediately obvious. Once again, this is in this speech I gave last weekend, and I'm going to put up tomorrow, but let me just tell you what I mean by this. if you've got a bunch of red, let's say you've got red bird, and you want to turn it into a blue bird, then the traditional way that you would do that is you would mate it with blue birds, and so your first bird is mostly red with a little purple and so on, and you continue to find the least red and most blue children you can find, and mate them with the most blue partners you can find, and over the course of many, many generations, you will eventually drift all of that genetic information over, and the gene that encodes for red birds will eventually get bred out of the system, although it'd still probably be there somewhere. Every now and then you get a red bird recessive. And over the course of a great deal of time, incrementally, generation by generation, the bird goes from bluer to slightly redder, red to slightly bluer, slightly bluer, becomes slightly bluer over a great period of time. And that's the way things have been. But what Google's doing is they're trying to become mimetic engineers. So if you want to turn a red bird blue, you can breed it with blue birds over the course of many, many, many generations, or you can find out what gene encodes for red feathers and which gene encodes for blue feathers, and then you can cut that gene out of the red bird's DNA, insert the blue feather gene, and then you will have blue birds overnight, forever. And they will be pure blue. And it doesn't take any time at all. Instead of having to go and do this entire rigmarole, genetic engineers would allow you to go in and target a specific feature that they wanted to change, and instead of having to breed it out through this incredibly complex and not terribly effective or efficient process with genetic engineering, you just go in and say, I don't want a blue bird, I want this bird to be blue. I turn off the red gene, I'll turn on the blue. Done. This is what they're trying to do with information. They're capturing every single mouse click, not because they plan to use it against you someday. This is what I've come to believe. But they're capturing it because every single mouse click is just yet another data point for how people behave. And they're convinced that if they collect enough data on enough people, they will be able to predict things, but more importantly, they will find out where those little switches are. So they would become mimetic engineers, not genetic engineers. I used an example before, and I've talked about this before, but I'll just go over it one more time, and then I think I'm going to go home. But basically, to give you an idea of why I think they're doing all of this, I'm going to make an example that is as ridiculous as I can make it, because if I make it realistic, you won't see what's going on behind the curtain. So I'm just going to purposely make this stupid so it stands out. People have been asking me if I can fix the streaming, that we're streaming a lower level. I'm on Wi-Fi now, and my cable connection went out a couple weeks ago, and I have to get it fixed so I can get that done and be back to where we were before. So sorry about the low quality. Anyway, yes, Asimov talked about this in the Foundation trilogy, Psychohistory. He had the idea, this is in the 50s, I want to say, that if you could collect enough information, that you couldn't predict individual behaviors, but if you could get enough information, you could predict the behaviors of large numbers of people. So here's what I think Google's trying to do. Let's say Google keeps track of every mouse click that's ever made. They keep track of every ad that's ever seen. They keep track of what movies you've seen. They know what you buy online through Amazon and so on. Let's say they've recorded all of this, and let's say that over the course of the years that they gather this, they put their AI on it, and they find, to their astonishment, for reasons that are unclear, that people who have just seen a horror movie are more likely to go out and buy a toaster the next day. Again, trying to make a ridiculous example, but stay with me on this. They can show that significant numbers of people who watch horror movies then go out and buy toasters more often than people who don't see horror movies. And then let's say that Google wants to have a society where fat people are gone because they don't like the way they look, and they're going to justify it as in their own health and so on. So instead of banning sugar and bread, what Google will do is they will suppress your ability to find horror movies. Because if you can't find a horror movie to go see, then you won't be as likely to buy a toaster. And if you don't buy the toaster, you won't be as likely to buy as much bread. And if you don't buy as much bread, you're not going to be as fat. And so in order to reduce obesity, they will suppress horror movies. Now, needless to say, that example is just made up out of thin air, but that's what they're looking for. They're looking for trends. If this, then that. So rather than having to go and change all of society by moving this entire thing like crossbreeding a bird, instead of having to move the whole thing, they can just go in and hit the one little thing or the small things. So they'll find these connections that are not obvious to anybody. And the more data they get, the more confident they will be, and the more accurate their predictions will be. And as they analyze, no one's going to analyze it. Artificial intelligence is going to analyze it. It's beyond human comprehension. But they will begin to find patterns, and when they find, and what they're looking for are the choke points. They're looking for the bottlenecks. In other words, if all of this behavior is here, and then we want all of this behavior to be over here, looking at things historically through all this data we've captured, where is the narrowest point? At what point do all of these behaviors have to pass through? And then they're just going to go in there and change that. And that's it. And I know this is true because they put out a internal video which was leaked called The Selfish Ledger. It's based on the theory of the selfish gene by Richard Dawkins. And basically what they're saying is, and they say this out loud to their own people. This is a message they made for top management. This isn't for the rank and file Google people. Basically, they said that a person is their ledger. That the collection of choices that you make is in fact you, and survives your death. They're working. The ultimate goal, I'm utterly convinced, for these multi-billionaires is, and I know this sounds bizarre, but I just think everything points to it, makes sense, especially when you find out the research they're doing. I think they're trying to get as much data as they can so they can understand consciousness, so that they can encode their consciousness and upload it so that they will stay immortal. They want to live forever. That's what I believe. I really do. And when you run into artificial intelligence, you say, well, maybe it's smarter than we are, but we can always unplug it. No. If it's smarter than you are, it will figure out a way to convince you that you've unplugged it when you haven't, or it will find a way to plug itself in that you're unaware of. Chimpanzee's not going to outsmart, Victor Davis Hanson. It's just not going to happen. It doesn't matter how much time the chimpanzee has. He's not going to be able to put together something that Victor Davis Hanson is going to fall for. So, there you go. And comment section, CP Tome says, "Who wants to live forever?" Think about this. In this, I don't know if it was in this the Selfish Ledger movie, but I've heard it talked about before. They're saying because a computer intelligence is using electrons traveling very short distances, while biological intelligence is using electrochemicals over a wider distance, this distance. This is one of the reasons why computers are able to so-called quote-unquote think faster than us, because the actual mechanism that houses the consciousness is infinitely, well, not infinitely, but significantly faster. So in other words, one of the things they're saying is just think how great that would be if we could upload our consciousness into machines, into computers. We'd be able to think 1,000,000 times faster than we do now. And that is an indication of how far out in the woods these people are. You just think about that for a second. Think about that for a second. You could think 1,000,000 times faster than you think now. That means you could read virtually every book in existence in the length of the time it takes for me to finish this sentence. I don't honest to God know. I honest to God don't know what these people actually are thinking when they say things like that. I sometimes get bored standing in an elevator. But if I had to stand in an elevator, not for 1 minute, but for 3 million minutes? I'm sorry. Let's just find out. If I was in an elevator for 3 billion minutes, 60, it's 50,000 hours, 2,000 days, 5.7 years. So imagine that you are thinking a million times faster, and you go stand in an elevator, and in time it takes you to go down one floor, 1 minute, let's say, including the wait. Let's say that you had to stand in place without any break, awake all the time, fully conscious, and it would take you almost 6 years to ride that elevator down. Wow. Anyway, yeah, that's it. Yeah, I know I've been a little bit lackluster tonight, but I'm just a little bit tired, and we're not much longer to go. I've got one more script that I'm just wrapping up now, one more to do after that, and then we're done. And I can get back to putting my full attention into things like, firewalls and content for BillWhittle.com. I needed this job. That's all there is to it. And I'm very proud of it. And what I heard today, I'm very proud of it. So I can't wait to hear from you guys. It'll be one episode a week for the next 12 weeks, starting tomorrow. Links will be up there. And I will take care of all of that tomorrow morning. I was also sick, briefly sick. I was sick for a couple hours on Wednesday morning, which meant that we missed two Bill Whittle Now shoots. So hopefully this uploading the speech and also the having the podcast available will make up for that a little bit. Anyway, I think that'll do it. The cruise continues to grow, by the way, and that's going to be an absolute blast. We're not quite there yet, but we probably got about another 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks left to buy your ticket, and man, we're going to have some fun. There's some really great people on that tour already, plus Steve and Scott. So that'll do it. As always, thanks again to the members at BillWhittle.com who make the show possible, and all of our friends out there, and all of my Star citizens and the rest of the gang. Have some news on that front, but it's going to still be another couple weeks, I think, before I can start playing around with that. Anyway, that'll do it for this edition of the Stratosphere Lounge on the 30th of January, 2020. I'm Bill Whittle. You guys be careful out there, and I will see you next time right here on the Stratosphere Lounge.